I'm Jasmine Bibb, and welcome to the Woman It May Concern, the podcast. This season is different. Season 2. It's personal. It's honest. It's rooted in one journey. The journey of becoming. From overload to intention, from survival to design, from carrying everything to choosing self with clarity. Season 2 is a living conversation. It's about motherhood, identity, matrescence, and what it means to design a life that belongs to you and not just your responsibilities. This isn't about perfection. It's about truth. It's about becoming. It's about creating language for things we feel but don't always know how to name. This is To the Woman It May Concern, the podcast, and season 2 starts now. So hello and welcome back to another episode of To the Woman It May Concern, the podcast. If you are back for another round, welcome back. And if you're joining for the very first time, welcome. I hope that you stay a while. So I am Jasmine Bibb, the host of To the Woman It May Concern. And I just want to remind you that season 2 is about how I ensure this season appears or experienced for you is like a living classroom. We're talking about a lot of things that I've learned. As you guys know, I'm always on some type of journey to discovery. And this season is no different. I am working into this season my journey of motherhood, what I'm learning, how I'm intentionally using the tools that I'm learning about to design a life that allows me to become the person that I believe I'm meant to be. And so, with that being said, today's topic is so enlightening. Guys, we are talking about maternal neuroplasticity. Say it with me, maternal neuroplasticity. So I'm going to keep you on the edge of your seats a little bit longer as to what exactly maternal neuroplasticity is. But today is a very, very, very special episode because we have with us Dr. Jodi Pawluski. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Jodi Pawluski, and then we will welcome her and get into some questions so that I can help you understand what maternal neuroplasticity is. And I promise, it will change your life and it will blow your mind when you understand this concept and the way that science just continues to amaze me. So, without further ado, Dr. Pawluski is a neuroscientist, therapist, and author, internationally recognized as a leading expert in parental brain science. Guys, I really tried to ensure that I got that word right on the first go round. But parental brain science. All right. So her work focuses on how the brain changes during the transition to motherhood and how maternal mental health affects both mothers and their families. Her research has been published in leading neuroscience journals and featured in major international media outlets, including the New York Times, Scientific American, and CNN. In addition to her research, Dr. Pawluski provides counseling and consultation in perinatal mental health. She is the author of Mommy Brain and host of the podcast Mommy Brain Revisited, both created to make the science of parental brain accessible to a wider audience. At the center of her work is a commitment to helping people better understand the neurological and emotional realities of parenthood. Dr. Pawluski, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too, guys. I am so excited. You know how I feel about sharing the wealth and relatability and vulnerability, and this conversation with Jodi will be no different than what you've gotten when you've come to this podcast before. So, as I share with you in my opening, maternal neuroplasticity is the topic for today. And so we'll get right to it. Jodi, Please, please, please. I'm somewhat enlightened. I'm here to learn as a student too today, but if
Okay.
you could, please share what exactly is maternal neuroplasticity?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, when I think of neuroplasticity, for me, this is how our brain is changing, essentially, right? It's plastic, it's changing, it's being modified. And so when we're talking about this in the context of motherhood, we know that the brain changes significantly across pregnancy and the postpartum period. And so I'm guessing if any of you or for all of you who are mothers out there, you're like, oh, yeah, it's not surprised my brain was doing some things, right? And in fact, for over 50 years, there's been research in this area, primarily in animal models, because we didn't have the technology to really look at the human brain until probably what 30 years ago, I would say, or
Right.
more. So, and of course, when we're looking at the human brain changes, we can't look in as much detail as what we can look at in animals. But I'm going to give you the once over of what we know happens. I also want to say that what happens is normal and adaptive, and in fact, and maybe we'll get into this, but it's not in any way that your brain is becoming dysfunctional. But we can talk about this because I know many of us are feeling, and I'm a mom too, that my brain isn't working or as it used to.
Mhm.
We'll talk about that in a second. So basically, I want to tell you what happens in your brain, just the kind of key points. We know in the human brain, and this happens and a lot of changes happen that are similar in all mammals, but in the human brain, recent research has shown that across pregnancy, there are changes in the structure of different brain areas. The overall size, let's say, of the brain, as well as the size of different brain areas, seem to decrease.
Mm.
And so overall, the brain seems to decrease. I know. You you have a question already, I bet. Uh, anyway, the brain seems to decrease in size, about 4%, and in certain brain areas, about 1%. And then, so that's structure. We have kind of this decrease across pregnancy. In the postpartum period, there's some research showing there's a little bit of increases in size in certain areas. And then the decrease in these brain areas, mostly lasts to date about 2 years. So I also want to say that you might be thinking, okay, it's a decrease, then my brain isn't functioning. And in fact, what's been shown is that in the idea we talk about often is that it's fine tuning. So this decrease, so there's decreases in certain brain areas that are important for understanding the needs of others, which is obviously important for parenting.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is those decreases, so the decrease is actually associated with an increase in sensitivity
Hmm.
towards the infant. So this is a good thing. This is normal, adaptive. Those decreases also have been shown in two separate studies in women in two separate countries. And so it's pretty consistent. I like to think of it as, we know that our hormones change across pregnancy.
Mhm.
That's normal. It's important. They have to, right? So I think of the brain as something, one of those other things that's changing. It's normal. It's supposed to, and it's preparing for a baby. So
Hmm.
this is structure though. And then we have to think about how the brain is acting in terms of activity. So often we are getting caught up in the structure because we're like, oh my God, the brain shrinks, I'm losing my mind, which isn't true necessarily. We'll get into that. But also the other point for me is what's actually is the brain doing, right? Because we all know that size doesn't necessarily matter for things. It's usually how things are functioning. And so, in terms of function, a lot more research has been done in the postpartum period. But what we know is that mothers and fathers usually have increased activity in brain areas that are important for parenting, and particular in response to a cue from their infant compared to a non parent.
Hmm.
So, if you show a picture of a baby to a mom versus someone who's a non-mom, the mom's brain will light up essentially or become more active. And this is really important to consider because you want activity to change, right? And it really shows that there's a lot of neuroplasticity during the transition to motherhood.
Hmm.
So that's a brief once over. I also want to point out that dad's brains change too, but
Mhm.
not to the same degree.
Interesting. So we know, I think, I'm a mom as well, which is why this is so fascinating. As I prepared for motherhood, you think a lot of what I read and a lot of what I saw said, you'll have 3 trimesters, your body will change, you may become tired, you'll ebb and flow with fatigue and energy and appetite. But never once did it ever mention anything about the brain? And my daughter is almost 4, and it has
Yeah.
been within the frame of age of 3 that this enlightenment around brain activity has come to light for me. And so, with that being said, you've helped us to understand what it is and how our brains function and just some of the social cues we take that make us move and interact the way that we do. But why is it that you think, like, what is happening in the brain that if you think about the mother on this call or the mother on this listening to this episode, the human listening to this episode, what's the easiest way for them to understand the shrinkage? Because in my mind,
Yeah.
once I got to, like, a certain
Okay.
age, my brain didn't change anymore, right? Like, it my brain is my brain is my brain, and you're telling us, "No, your brain is
Oh.
your brain, but it's not based on, like, this stage of life you've entered."
Yeah, yeah. I think, we have a lot of misconceptions about the adult brain. Like we think it's hardwired. And so you get to
Mhm.
adulthood, it's over. Like, this is the way I learn, this is how I behave. And this isn't true because, of course, we can modify our behavior and our brain is constantly active and changing in response to our environment right now where we're talking and things like this. So I think that's important to remember. But what's really been interesting about this stage of matrescence, as we're
Mhm.
talking about it now, right? This transition to motherhood, is that it seems to be a time in life when the brain, in adult life, when the brain is at its most plastic, its most
Huh.
changeable. And
Okay.
so I also want to point out there's been some research showing that the degree of change is in terms of some of the structural characteristics of this change across pregnancy is very similar to what you see during adolescence.
Mhm.
And so this is also really important. So it's to give some sort of indication of the impact of this time of our lives, matrescence, on our brains. And it's likened to brain changes in adolescence. There's a lot going on in adolescence in terms of brain changes. And so I think that's also helps to give a reference point, but it's also happening in a shorter period of time,
Mhm.
right? In less than a year, your brain is being modified significantly in structure and in function.
Mhm.
So this is also one of those bits that is fascinating to me about the transition to motherhood is just how it impacts your brain
Yeah.
as an adult. So
That's cool.
yeah, it's cool.
It is pretty cool. So, in understanding, we talked a little bit about this season thus far about matrescence. So, this is not foreign to the listeners. And if you did not listen to the episode on matrescence, I would urge you to go back and listen to that episode because it will make my conversation with Jodi make so much more sense when you understand the buildup of what matrescence is and how you layer maternal neuroplasticity on top of that. Like those two concepts, guys, they go hand in hand. You got to understand one to get the other. Otherwise, you'll be lost. With that being said,
Yeah.
before we get into like where this all stemmed from. I know we talked a little bit about the work being done in animals, but I want to hear a little bit more historical context. But before doing that, I have a question for you that as I've done my own research, I don't have the answer because it's not my situation. So we talk a lot about matrescence, motherhood, and how the birth of this child and what that does to us in all the ways. But you have some instances, and this is really a question of curiosity, where you have people who are caregivers rather
Mhm.
be adoptive parents, family members who have, inherited children due to certain circumstances, or are simply just that close to, they're the aunt. They are the, however, is there any form of like neuroplasticity that happens with them when you think about back to that picture example of, granted, I'm gonna see a picture of my daughter and say, oh my gosh. But I also know that my sister is very involved in helping me to raise, helping us to raise our daughter. And I can't imagine she wouldn't light up in some way too, knowing that it's a little bit different. But is there something there that happens in the brain of a caregiver as well?
Yeah, yeah, and this is a great question, there hasn't been a lot of research on this, but we do know there's a couple studies looking at brain activity, not structure, but brain activity
Mm,
on adoptive parents, and showing very similar brain activity in response to infant cues.
mhm.
Right? I mean, as we'd expect, right? Anyone can caregive.
Right.
It just involves, obviously doing it. And we all have the parts of our brain we need to do it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It's just, we just have to use them,
Yeah.
right? Or have the opportunity. So in that regard, I would anticipate that anyone who's an involved caregiver or an adoptive parent or who's spending lots of time with the child and cares for and loves the child is having some changes in their brain, particularly on the functional level.
Mhm.
I would guess the changes structurally would be slightly different or much less than what you see across pregnancy, just because those changes are also, I think, and I'm speculating here, a function of all the physiological changes as well. So it doesn't mean that just because a mom's brain changes more structurally that she's the better parent
Mm.
or better at doing it. I think what it does mean is that her brain is just really preparing to rapidly learn because she's invested her body into producing the baby. So
Ooh,
this
that's
is
good.
yeah, and so but anyone can learn how to do it and your brain can figure it out. And what we would see would probably be very similar functional responses to infant cues to those who are invested. And we are seeing that in some studies, particularly in fathers who aren't birthing parents. Yeah.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's helpful to know, as I'm sure we've got a little bit of everybody listening to this podcast. And so I think, obviously the episode won't be for everyone, but there are individuals with unique circumstances that I wanted to ask the question for. So with that being
Yeah.
said, let's dig into like where did maternal neuroplasticity come from? The term, when did this first come on someone's radar? Let's talk about the historical
The
context of
history. Yeah.
yeah, why isn't it well known? I know why, but let's talk more about like it didn't just appear, but to some extent it feels like it did. You clearly have a long history and a career around it, but like where did it come from?
Yeah, this is a good question. As I reflect on the science of it, I mean, there's been curiosity over obviously the ages about maternal mental health, for one,
Right.
right? And what's going on there, and why are some women depressed? And there's some theories I've read from back in the day that it's because there was so much fluid in the uterus that it overflowed into the brain and made her cry. There's a
Really?
report, yeah. And so there was an idea, of course, I take from this, there was an idea that there was something about the pregnancy and the physiology that was impacting the brain and the mental health. But in terms of really getting to the science, I mean, in terms of neuroscience itself, it's relatively new area of research because we've only recently developed techniques to look at brains, right? So what was it in 1906 or there was a Nobel Prize to go Golgi and Cahal because they had developed a technique to look at neurons in the brain.
Hmm.
So it's relatively new, I think, looking inside or looking at the brain. And of course, they were using animal models to do this. So I think there's that piece, and then there's been a lot of interest, at least in the animal research and in behavioral neuroscience. This interest in why does the brain change? Like, what about it changes so that an animal that previously was never attracted to young becomes really attracted to young.
Mm,
and their own. And this is, I mean, not every animal is like that. We see a lot of shared kind of parenting in different animal species. But if you look at, for example, sheep,
mhm.
female sheep who hasn't had offspring won't be attracted to offspring, but once she has her own, she's very much has a bond with her baby and not others. And so
Understood.
the question is, I mean, this is really like going back to animal behavior, but the idea from a lot of the research was what happens to the brain? What happens to the brain that makes it maternal, that
Mm,
makes it attracted to the baby? What's going on? And that's where a lot of this research has come from, is to figure out what actually creates maternal behavior. And so through the ages or the past few decades, we've been, many of us research different aspects of that neuroplasticity with motherhood in hopes of understanding one, what happens to make her maternal, but also what are those processes that continue to allow her to care for the child. And it's really an intricate process. And, a lot of this also applies to humans. We have very similar brain circuitry for certain aspects of behavior and processing information. And it's a lot of different brain areas that seem to have to coordinate to come together in order to care for your child. So you
yeah.
have to be motivated, right? And find baby rewarding. You have to make decisions and you have to be able to regulate your emotions. You have to perceive and understand certain actions, right? And you have to have empathy and try to understand the needs of others. It's a lot going on in our brains.
Mhm.
And I would also add, in that first maybe year or so, or the first at least few months, we're also almost acting as the brain for our baby because we have to respond to them, right?
Huh?
They can't feed themselves. They can't regulate their temperature, right? They can't clean themselves. So we have to help them learn what certain cues mean as
Mm,
well. And so it's a lot going on that we're learning. So I also want to say that this isn't something that, baby's born, you know what you're doing. Sorry. That doesn't happen. But we learn over time and we make mistakes as parents, and that's normal. I also think really parenting has to be a more of a group effort, right? So
yeah.
it's not something just for mom. It really goes much better if there's multiple adults who can participate and take over,
Mhm.
and support each other.
Yeah.
So
That
yeah,
village, right? Like, back
that
to that
village.
village thought of it takes a village. When I say it truly takes a village, when you think about what you've just said about how our brains have to do this, but don't forget this. Oh, and just a touch of this, all of that. And then you add on the piece of being the brain for the baby to some extent in the very
Yeah.
beginning. Um, all of those pieces and parts when you either don't have a village or if you just don't simply understand all that we're talking about today prior to, it can be overwhelming. So you begin to understand why a mother's mental health might suffer, where anxiety may come from. Like, it is not, I think prior to having a child, I have the platform of the Overachiever Mom Collective. And the thought is, insert baby, right? Till you have a
Oh,
baby, and you have to
oh,
understand
yeah.
all of these things that you learn in real time, and then the things you learn through episodes like this, through your research, through the readings, through the blog posts that you have, your book, your podcast. Like, it's you almost wanna tell people there's a prerequisite that you should consider prior to having a baby versus "Oh, yes, there are 3 trimesters, breastfeeding, XYZ, and go." No, no, no. It's so much more involved than that.
Yeah, yeah. It's I mean, not to, like, scare people or anything, but it
At
is a
all.
process that, having a child is life-changing,
Mhm,
and it's better to go in it with more knowledge about it. And
mhm.
and for me, when I think about the brain changing during this time, I think of it in terms of knowing this, then we need to think about how we can support it. And for
Oof.
me, I'm often thinking of what does the brain need? So if you're feeling really anxious or upset or you can't think or things. For me, I think the brain's telling you something. And so
Yeah.
what do you need? What does it need? What is the brain telling you and what does it need? And so I think if we went into it thinking about perhaps our brain health a bit more or being aware that the brain is demanding our attention in certain cases, then maybe then we'll pause a bit more and give our brain what it needs,
Yeah.
right?
That is so true. You think you don't wanna scare people, right? There's a balance, but the more you don't think you're broken, or you don't think that something's wrong with you specifically. You begin to understand that this is just the nature of how you adapt to such a life-changing event.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also something it can go more smoothly if we have certain things, right?
Mm.
Or there's that piece of acceptance. Like today, I'm really can't think straight, but I didn't sleep well last night. So, of course, my brain is like, we're kind of minimizing our output at the moment, right? And then you can be like, okay, I'm just going to accept that's where I'm at for the moment and move forward. But of
Agree.
course, if there's continual mental health struggles that are pervasive, I mean, this is not something that should be taken lightly, and definitely searching out support is always beneficial. So, just want to
Agreed.
point that out.
Yeah, that's definitely, that is important to share. I wanna talk a little bit about you and how you got into your work, but before doing that, can you debunk a potential myth for me?
Mhm.
So, when I came across the word maternal neuroplasticity, I went down the rabbit hole to understand what it was and how it works and all of that. There was enough research, but there wasn't like a ton of information, at least not in the way in which I went about the research. And so, as I tried to understand why that was, what I kept coming across, and this is what I want to know if it is, there's probably some truth to it, but maybe not as much. The thought was that the space or the area of science is typically driven by males. And so, as a result of that, males, they're going through something to your point when their wife or, whomever has a child, but this is not something that plagues them or impacts them is the better word in a way that it impacts us, and therefore there just hasn't been a lot of conversation or funding around continuing to push this forward faster and with bigger impact. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have thoughts on this. Um, because number one is we should all be interested in this transition to parenthood. Essentially, women, female bodies, birth nations. And so this should actually be something we should all be interested in. In terms of the history of the field, I do hear this idea quite often that it hasn't moved forward because it's only been dominated by men. I would counter this and say, actually, no. I have many colleagues who've been doing this research. The first research in animal models was done by men. Many men have studied this, been in this field and started it. Maybe because there are more men in science than at the time, but it really was men who were curious about it
Hmm.
initially, and also with regards to mental illness. Again, of course, women weren't encouraged to be highly educated 100 years ago in most societies. So, you know, maybe there were just a few good men who started this, right?
Right.
Um, I don't know, but I have to say, I want us to take care in assuming that women are studying females' bodies because I've also run into many female researchers who couldn't care less about the female and
Hmm.
only look at males. So, as researchers, we look at different things for different reasons. And there are a huge majority of women researchers who don't study sex differences at all. So that you have to take care to not assume that we study something because we are it,
Uh-huh.
right? Um, I also have colleagues who are gay men,
Mhm.
not fathers, never will have children, absolutely fascinated
Mm.
by the brain and motherhood and pregnancy. And so I think we we have to remember that this is again something we should all get excited about. It's pretty cool what the
It is
female
very
body does, like across pregnancy and postpartum, and how the brain changes. And like, this is actually really cool, right? So
mhm,
I think there's been a lot of people interested in this area of research who are men and women, but they haven't had the funding because often motherhood was something that's like normal, natural, everybody does it, blah, blah, blah.
mhm.
And what's important is how the child is developing. So we
Yeah,
would look at mother's mental health as a function of child development. And this still happens. And now we're more interested in motherhood itself. But I would have to say maybe 10 or so years ago, there was a bit of a shift in the narrative. I'm not sure why, but there's a bit more of this interest in motherhood and the maternal brain,
yeah,
partly brought on by some research findings, maybe also a number of different kind of discussions. Maybe it had to also do with the increase in mental illness in the postpartum period, those numbers that were starting to be talked about a bit more. But so for me, I think we're often not advancing in women's health research, and not just because there aren't men interested in doing the research, but
yeah.
there could be men not interested in, you know, aspects of it for sure. But I don't know. I feel like, yeah, it's an interesting question, but this is my experience of it.
I appreciate
Um,
you sharing that. I think it brings a lot of light and awareness to you think as someone who's in it daily, your perspective in comparison to me Googling or using AI to say, why isn't there more of this? Because if we're not in it daily, that's all we have. So to understand that it is evolving, but it's not simply a male versus female or interest type of situation, it's bigger than that. And that science is bigger than that. So you did debunk that myth for me.
Yeah, I do want to say though, and I'm being specific to the neuroscience field of this. I feel
Uh-huh.
like there's many men and women doing the research, but when you move into things like perinatal mental health or perinatal psychiatry,
Mm,
those conferences that I go to, it's like all women.
got it.
So I think there's need for diversity in those aspects for sure. And I'm not sure why that is, but yeah. But that being said, I really think we should all be really curious about women's bodies,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we all came from one.
Absolutely.
So, and
Yeah,
y-
absolutely.
yeah, I think it's just, I mean, it's also really fascinating biologically if you're a scientist, what goes on. Anyway, there was something else I was going to say and I forgot, but we'll just keep talking and maybe it will come back to me.
Okay. So I want to hear more about what
Oh,
motivates you to get into the space that maternal neuroplasticity, science. Did you have a science teacher? Did you have a certain
yeah.
focus prior to your children that then shifted? We all go through we reinvent ourselves so many times, but what got you to this place right now with where you are with your studies and your research and your interests?
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say, is that I didn't start studying the maternal brain because I'm a mother. I actually started studying it because it was really interesting to me.
Okay.
And I actually didn't have kids until much, much later.
Mhm,
But how did I get really interested in this?
mhm.
And I was always really interested in how, like, animals worked. So I grew up on a small farm, and my grandparents were retired at the time, but they were farmers in northern Canada for majority of their lives. And I remember sitting with my grandma one day after we had had baby chicks hatched out, and I must have been 4 or 5, and I was asking her how it worked, like how did the chicken work, and
Really?
yeah, I wanted to know how it worked, and she drew, and I can still picture it, but I don't have the paper, but she drew me the chicken with the different organs inside and everything, and it tried to explain some of this to me, yeah, but I wanted to know how it worked, and then I was always really curious about growing up on a farm, about the interaction between moms and babies, right? It was pretty cool. We had actually a chicken that hatched out ducks, because we put the eggs underneath the duck, and then it was really interesting to see how she was trying to get them out of water, but they wanted to go in water, and it was like, so I
Oh,
had these little experiences in my life, and I also will say I have really, I think, really great parents, and I also remember being in university thinking, I want every mother to have the opportunity to be healthy during this time. Like, I want every child to have, a happy parent, and I was really curious about how parenting worked and what happens to parents and how do parents help children learn and develop, and then, throughout my training it became this kind of, I had this interest in hormones, brain, and behavior. And if you want to look at hormones, brain, and behavior, pregnancy and motherhood is the
indeed.
ultimate. And so that's kind of where I ended up. But it was this always this interest in behavior, how things worked, how they were interacting, and something about parenting was really intriguing to me, for a long time.
Wow, it's always
Yeah.
interesting to think about exposure, right? Especially, I guess this is like my little soapbox moment for like being a parent, right? Exposure is everything. Like I
Yeah.
moments like that just seem so innocent and being on the farm and your grandmother showing you the picture. Who knew that it would
Yeah.
evolve into this passion that you now have?
Yeah, yeah, if you think about that, and I mean, I have 2 kids, they're 12 and 14, and, um I think we spend a lot of time experiencing things with them, right? And I think that's really important to experience things together. And you never know what will land, uh,
Correct.
but but it's fun. Also, it's fun to observe, explore, create, and do those things, with your children. And yeah, I'm curious to see how mine will turn out.
Same, same.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to hear, or if you could tell us, we've talked a lot. We've talked about what maternal neuroplasticity is. We've talked about hormones. We've talked about women. We talked about science. We've talked about your experiences. So I know that hearing this for many, if they've heard this concept of maternal neuroplasticity for the very first time, is probably a lot. And so, my goal in creating and bringing awareness to this topic is because, in this entire season, with all of the various topics, is I want the information to stick so that people are able to apply it, organize it, and apply it to their lives in a way that works best for them. And so, if we had to skinny down our conversation to three main things that you want people to remember about maternal neuroplasticity, what would those three things be?
Okay. It's a great question. So, number one would be that your brain is changing and this is normal. Number two would be that everyone has the parts in their brains they need to parent, just so don't forget that.
Mhm.
And the third thing is that your brain needs to be taken care of.
Mm,
And I think this is an important one, that it is changing a lot. And so it does need perhaps extra care.
agreed. I think those
Yeah.
are three really, really good, simple, but impactful and powerful takeaways that are like nice sound bites, like
Yeah.
fine. It was a lot. You have to go back and listen again. That's okay. But
Yeah.
those, you can put those in your pocket and take those with you daily.
Yeah, I hope so. Exactly. Those are your take homes.
Exactly. So, my last question would be as we round out today's episode, what's next in the research and space of neuroplasticity, rather it be the overarching thought for science or for you specifically based on the work that you do?
Yeah, yeah. What's next? I think there's lots of different directions we're going in the field, which is great. I think for me personally, is I've been really interested in trying to understand the impact of the mental load of motherhood
Mm,
on memory, and then what would that look like in terms of brain changes? Because I think we are often misunderstanding brain function for brain being overloaded and then deciding it can't do it all,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
So I think there's this piece of mental load with motherhood that's very salient, like very important. We all experience, but we haven't actually figured out what that means in terms of our brain health. And this is something for me I'm really curious about. I think we also have a lot of different questions to ask. One you brought up about caregivers and the brain. I'm also curious to really understand more about emotions, cognition, and changes that aren't necessarily related to how we mother or parent and
Mm.
what that looks like in the brain, right? Because parents will say, "Oh, I became more empathetic to everyone." And what does that mean, right? In terms of what's our brain doing? So there's these kinds of questions but for me, the big one is mental load, mental health, memory, brain. What's going on there in moms?
I love that. I love that. Ooh, I can't wait to continue
Okay.
to follow you and just hear your thought leadership on that. I think that's actually a really nice segue because I'm sure that caught the attention of a lot of listeners. So, how can they follow you? Where can they find your thought leadership? Where are those spaces where, if they want more of Dr. Jodi Pawluski, they can indulge?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. That's probably where you can find me most often. Also on LinkedIn as Dr. Jodi Pawluski. I have a website, Jodi Pawluski, where you can find more about me, my research. Also offer a course for healthcare professionals on the parental brain in health and with illness, and so that's coming up. And I do other things. I do many things because I love to share the science. And I think it's really, really important for people to understand how the brain changes with parenthood.
Agreed. Okay, guys. So today we've talked with Dr. Jodi Pawluski about maternal neuroplasticity. She's giving you all of the ways that you can stay engaged with this particular topic as she continues to do her research. As this episode is just the very beginning, this is like literally the tip of the iceberg. Once you dig into what Dr. Pawluski has to share, you will only continue to be enlightened. And so, with that being said, when I think about the topics we're talking about along the way for this season, my goal is to share with you, and then my goal is for you to share it with others. And the reason why I think it's so important to share is because we can't do these things all by ourselves. And we need these concepts and these ideas that are real to support us so that one, we don't feel broken, but most importantly, so that we're able to become the individuals that we are meant to be and live in our full purpose and use things like maternal neuroplasticity as opportunities to thrive forward. So,
Mm.
please, please, please share this episode with a mother, a caregiver, a friend, someone that you believe needs this enlightenment. As I round this out, as always, you can follow me on Instagram at the Overachiever Mom, and then subscribe to this podcast if you have not already on all platforms. And then, as you know, I also have a Substack. So, thank you again, Dr. Pawluski, for joining today's episode. I'm really, really grateful for your time, your thought leadership, and all that you're doing in the area of science.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys, until the next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.